Hi, guys, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. We help Muslims and non Muslims to handle Islam in the 21st century. My name is Mustafa, and this is my co host in the nick of time. If you wish to talk about Islam, the ideology, you have come to the right place. We cover current Islamic news, Islamic scripture, some crazy comments, and a weekly topic about Islam to examine, critique, and analyze. If this is not enough Islam for you, please drop by our Discord to discuss any further questions about Islam. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. However, we do embrace free speech and criticism if it's factual and correct. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic Show.
All right, that's the intro. Hello, everyone. I advertised this before, so I think everyone's been waiting in the comments for a while. Actually, no. But yeah. So, today we have an exciting episode. We were just finishing off discussion
All right,
just up to the point.
Nick, you have to do a proper intro. Welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show, everybody. How
Hey,
is
I'm not stopped, all right?
Yeah, listen, we have to do a proper intro. So we have a special guest today, Mr. Aymann Ismail. Mr. Aymann Ismail, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for the proper introduction, Moose. Nikhil, you got to wake up. I don't know what time it is over there, but you need coffee. You gotta do some speed. You gotta wake up, man.
Yeah.
Hey, I put a little child to sleep, all right? I'm sleeping myself.
Listen, the previous owners of this channel are based in the UK, so we took over from them. This was Stop Spamming and Rob's Speakers and Thunderous. So we still do like 4 p.m. every 4 p.m. Saturdays. They used to do 8 p.m. Fridays, which was 3 p.m. in Canadian time or New York time or States time.
Eastern Standard. We don't discriminate.
Yeah, we don't discriminate. But yeah, so we have. Don't think we don't have like other stuff like the news because we have Aymann Ismail as special guest as our focus for today, and Nikhil. He had some questions, and we're also gonna have audience participation today. So audience members, you'll get the invite link. You can come on here and you can ask Mr. Aymann Ismail questions regarding his stance, regarding his position.
The beard, even.
The beard, you can ask about.
I got a lot of good beard tips.
Yeah, you even can ask about his kids, his life, all that.
No,
stuff.
You can't ask about my kids. I don't talk.
All right. We'll cut the kids. We'll cut the kids. But yeah.
You know about what hasad is, right?
Hasad?
Hasad?
Oh, like
the evil
term.
eye.
Oh yeah, the evil eye. That nonsense. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, I believe in it, and I don't like to brag or talk about things that I'm happy about for that reason. So.
Okay, so we call it nazar in Pakistan. In the Arabic world, it's called, I believe, you call it hasad, but in Pakistan, it's nazar because it's nazar means sight. So that's what we call it.
Hasad, I think, means curse.
Hasad means.
But in like atheist corners, I think they just call it like a jinx. Do you guys believe in jinxes?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, in Sanskrit we have something very similar, which was brought by during Akbar's time as well, during Mughals. It's called Dishti. So since then, like, Moose actually saw it once you were mentioning it. We have to put like a demon picture outside of our house so it scares demons from coming inside of our house.
Yeah, I've seen it, and I've also seen like even my parents, well, my mom especially, like thinks that everything is a nazar. But in reality, it's coincidence, honestly, and things just happen in random. So
yeah.
So
all right.
Anyway.
So before we get too far into a rabbit hole, why don't we just start off by saying we've seen you on Slate for many videos. How about you tell us about yourself and who the man behind that video is for the audience?
Sure. So my name is Aymann Ismail. I was born in Jersey City, grew up in Newark, New Jersey. So I'm very much like a Jersey person. So I grew up Muslim, but it's interesting. I don't necessarily think I became Muslim until I discovered it on my own. when I pretty much when I got married. So I had already pretty much experienced Islam as a kid because I went to like a Muslim school. I learned Arabic. I learned to read the Quran, but very barely learned how to understand it. So it took me a long time for me to really understand Islam the way that I understand it now and actually believe in it. I think up until like even past college, even. So even though I was like calling myself Muslim, trying to pray 5 times and do all that, it didn't really click in me until I was much, much older. Now I'm a father. I still live in Newark. I lived in Brooklyn for a while, but I came back home because I just prefer the more low key environment. What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? Okay, so I got into journalism by accident. Actually, I wanted to be like I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid, so I wanted to make television. I wanted to make advertisements. I thought commercials were the coolest thing. My sister would want to change the channel, and I'm like, no, no, no. Have you not seen the new Tricks commercial? It looks sick, you know. So I got really into TV, making things look good, making things sound good, and at a really early age, I learned how to pirate software. So I was on like LimeWire, I was on Kazaa, I was on all those like really early versions of P2P sharing. And I'm like 11, 12, 13. But I found I was able to get Macromedia Flash before it became Adobe Flash. And I got Photoshop and I got Final Cut Pro. And I just learned how to use all this software because I knew I wanted to make TV shows. So I was like, I'm 10, 15, even 10 through 15 years old. I was like, I got to learn this stuff all the way to like high school where I was like actually making short films with friends and got into college, lied to my parents. I told them I was going to be an architect, but I knew they wouldn't be down with me going to art school. So I just went to a university and applied for the art school, used my portfolio, everything I'd made, using the software I'd stolen, and got into art school, which was really sick. And then my parents found out I went to art school at graduation. They were like, "Hey, man, why the hell's everyone walking around barefoot?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, it's just, they're protesting something. I don't know. You know, white people." And I had to eventually tell her this is actually an art school graduation. I'm an art. I got my BFA. And she was cool with it as long as I could work and like make money off of it. And alhamdulillah, I was able to by making videos for like small time stuff. I got into an ad agency and they had bought a magazine. So I worked at the magazine for a while and that's where I discovered journalism. And it was like, it just clicked. I loved it. I loved making short films, putting it on the internet and getting the feedback. I loved cutting things, editing things, filming things. And then when I got to Slate, somebody I'd worked with, Swansburg, suggested that I get in front of the camera because I wanted to do a series about Islam and Muslims. The premise was I would ask questions that I genuinely don't know the answer to as a Muslim. And while everyone was having a conversation about what is Islam, how do we understand it, I wanted to, like, I noticed that there was a lot of facetiousness in it. A lot of people were asking rhetorical questions on the Muslim side because they thought they knew the answers. A lot of people on the other side were asking loaded questions because they thought they also knew what the answers were. So I wanted to go in with a genuine curiosity. And that's when I made Who's Afraid of Aymann Ismail, and I made 15 episodes, I think, each time trying to dive into something that I didn't understand. And in the process, it made me like a better Muslim, I think. One of the episodes I think we're going to discuss here, I did one about ex-Muslims. It was my exposure to ex-Muslims at the onset was through right-wing media. I wasn't interacting with ex-Muslims. I didn't know that label existed, even though I knew plenty of people who I grew up with as Muslims who just didn't practice anymore. The label of ex-Muslim was new to me. And in my experience early on the internet with ex-Muslims was just, like Rebel TV, Tucker Carlson, like the Gateway Pundit, all of these really right-wing news sources bringing on ex-Muslims to basically talk shit about Islam. And I thought it was a bit shallow. They were just bringing people on to talk about their personal experiences. And that's why I was like, I know there's more to this, because I went online on Twitter and I was reading some people. I started following some people like Sarah Haidar, and I thought that this isn't as shallow as just these people who are they wanted to just be on TV and talk. And these right wing people thought that if they brought on somebody who was like ex-Muslim, they would have some kind of credibility about what was happening inside the Muslim community that somebody otherwise wouldn't have. And we got to talking. The episode was really cool. I learned a lot. I think the big takeaway from there was liberals weren't talking about Islam enough because of how afraid they were to punch down on a community that was already being beat up by the government and the press. So instead, they went to the right wing to talk because they had real grievances. But at the same time, the only people who were willing to punch down on Muslims in America were the right wing. So it was just a relationship of convenience for both sides. And yeah, I thought it was a really, really amazing episode. And then on, I committed to not, I won't say like be a champ. No, it's more like I promised myself that I would always uplift people who identified as ex-Muslims because it's a lot of the same questions about Islam that Muslims have. And I admire the way that ex-Muslims have the courage and the curiosity to explore these things without punching down and making it about culture or trying to say that the immigrants are coming in, so we need to keep them out because they're Muslim, or justifying things like Muslim bans. So I would love to have that discussion today. I don't know if that is enough of an intro.
Yeah, that's a perfect intro. And just to add to that,
A very valid
you want to go
point
first?
too. Yeah, a very valid point too. Like you clarified that we're not against, a lot of ex-Muslims are not opposed to Muslim migration. Absolutely not. That's not the point. What they want is to be able to critique the religion or be able to live away from the religion or have the choice to be, not imposed by said religion. So I think I'm glad you brought that point up. And Nikhil, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, because I know the average Muslim who comes here as an immigrant is like me, brown. I know that I might sound white, but I know this isn't a summer tan. My dad's an immigrant as well from Southeast Asia.
That's
And
a
I know,
very good summer tan. That's a very excellent summer tan.
but yeah, I know an average Muslim person who comes here, the only thing he can worry about is going to work, coming home, beating his kids for not doing his homework, and going to sleep. That's probably every immigrant child's experience growing up. So he doesn't have enough time to actually worry about world politics or implementing
world domination. If you ask Tucker Carlson,
yeah, essentially, right? So our problem. This is a criticism Moose and I get quite a bit. When I had my discussion with Sarah, this is something that she got a lot with as well. We're not criticizing the guy that goes to work every morning, comes home, plays with his kids, and goes to sleep. We're criticizing what essentially any idea is, and when we're given essentially the right of freedom of speech, living in the Western world. What freedom of speech is essentially discussing our contradictions that we have with any ideology, no matter what religion or what form that ideology comes in, and asking questions.
Yeah, so I think the distinction between criticism of an ideology and being bigoted against a particular community is a very separate things. And some of it's a pet peeve of mine as well. And I think someone like Ayman, who I'm also spoke to as well, says that I actually like his alternative term, which is anti-Muslim. That should be the word that should replace Islamophobia, because there's is that your nephew?
No, my nephew still sounds.
That's my baby.
Oh, okay. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the replacement of the we should replace the term Islamophobia because it lumps critics and bigots into one category when they could be very different, very very different from each other. And
is that true? Do people think of critics as Islamophobes?
Oh yeah.
We because I'll give you a best example. Moose, when he went to Pakistan, and had to fear for being called being an atheist and essentially have a death penalty, which is one of the scenarios that could very possibly happen. He was called for even mentioning to critique that he would have been called a Islamophobe, and at
By who?
that
Like
point,
by people on the internet?
Not necessarily by people on the
anyone
internet, by
this
the liberal society, even in Canada as well, would label us as Islamophobes because, we're, especially in my university too,
So
that
here's how I feel about this, man. I think Islamophobia is an apt word. I think it's a necessary to frame it that way because a phobia is what? It's a fear of something that you don't know or fear of something that you don't understand that is irrational, right? I think you're right that people who have hate in their heart are not the same as people who criticize, but I think that's more of a misuse of the phrase or the term Islamophobia
I
than
disagree.
anything else. Because listen, um, people say stupid shit. Like people will call somebody racist for eating Aunt Jemima pancakes. Is that person an actual racist, or do they just not know about the history of Aunt Jemima and menstrual performances and all that stuff, right? So I think it's it's not the problem of the term; it's the problem of how it's used. If
I,
somebody's going to call you
I, dis-
something that doesn't make sense,
I disagree because you have to separate terminologies because of the fact that an ideology should never be free of criticism. But you see that Muslims as a people should not be discriminated against. That is the issue. So we should.
but that how does that address the fact that Islamophobia talks about the fear of Islam based on something that doesn't exist
But
versus
keep in mind,
bigotry?
Islam
You know
is
what
an
I mean?
ideology.
So like a good example of Islamophobia is Donald Trump telling an interviewer, "Islam hates us." That's not a criticism of Islam. That's not a genuine exploration into any of these ideas that I'm sure that you do. That's Islamophobia, right? Because he's basically projecting fear of something that he doesn't understand.
But
If
keep in mind,
somebody were to say, "Well, what
wouldn't it
about this verse 422? It doesn't make any sense to me. Let's talk about this." That's not a fear. You know what I mean? If anything, that's the opposite. So
but keep in mind,
wouldn't you say a better word to describe it though is anti-Muslim bigotry rather than Islamophobia? Would that be a more apt fit of a term?
I think they're both doing the same thing. I'm just saying that if somebody describes a critic who's a genuine critic as an Islamophobe, it's a misuse of the term. But for example, I found that people who tear down the phrase is the I keep saying phrase who tear down Islamophobia as a term are sometimes Islamophobes who don't want to be held accountable for their bigotry. Um, I'm going to talk about a big atheist hero right now, Sam Harris, for example. Huge Islamophobe, has in a lot of his critiques, I'm putting in air quotes for people who can't see, um, won't go the extra mile and actually think critically and honestly about some of the things that he's saying. He'll just go ahead and say this is the mother lode of bad ideas. But then when he talks about Christianity or Judaism or anything, he's holding it with kids' gloves and he's not giving that same level of condemnation or simplification. You know what I mean? And so in my mind, that's like the perfect example of somebody who is afraid of Islam, who isn't in their mind at least thinking of it as just a set of an ideas, but thinking about it as a global cabal, basically this hive mind of people who are all operating at the same wavelength, who are on the same page, which we all know as Muslims at one point is not true. We can't even agree on when to celebrate Eid. So, but people like Sam Harris like to think of Islam as basically um, like a manual for every automaton who calls themselves a Muslim, who just lives their lives exactly as the book is written, which still to this day never met anyone who does. So it's that's what I think is there. That's like it's necessary to protect and that term because people who are Islamophobes like to tear it down. There are so many examples of people who are bigoted against Muslims who make their whole crusade about the term and trying to pretend like Islamophobia doesn't exist. and some people have called it like a conspiracy from care or what have you, which again is not the source of the term, but it's in my mind, it's a term that makes sense. I use it all the time. And if you are someone who is honestly and genuinely having an honest discussion about Islam, you're not an Islamophobe. So if somebody calls you that, it's like, I don't know, why does that bother you?
So keep in mind what happens if said fear is genuine. If said fear and they're actually criticizing the ideology, what happens then?
I don't know if they understand it, because
What
Islam as an
Like, for example,
ideology
I'll
is,
give you an
how do
example
you
then.
describe it? No, hear me out. Islam as it's
Yeah.
practiced in any of the different Muslim parts of the world isn't the same Islam. You know what I mean? If you take Islam in Saudi Arabia and then compare it to Islam in New Jersey, it's not going to be the same thing. So if you're going to say, well, as an ideology, I have a fear of these people because of their ideology, you don't know each of these individuals' ideologies. You can go to the same mosque and have a different ideology or different approach. Just like you can go to America and find people who are pro-gun and anti-gun. You'll find those same people in Islam. So it just still doesn't make sense to me that you can have a fundamental fear of a people based on their ideology if you don't know each of
Yeah.
their own individual ideologies.
Then I'll give you one small example that maybe we can expand it. Let's say if someone is gay or a part of the LGBTQ spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
the people a lot will face the wrath of God, essentially, right? Would that person's fear be justified? Because for him, many people, the punishment that he would essentially have to face would be death. Now, the average person might not do it, but but he will probably. This person said a person who's a part of the spectrum might face a lot of hate from essentially a scripture that says that he needs to face the wrath of God. Wouldn't he have a genuine fear of this ideology? This is just hypothetically, right? As a
Again, okay,
discussion.
hypothetically on this ideology, if you believe that every version of Islam, every ideology as practiced as every Muslim, you'll be erasing the so many of the gay Muslims that I've met. If you ever come to New York, there's so many parties of just like gay Muslim parties. Like, do those people not exist? I've prayed with gay Muslims before. I've met people who were gay who were better Muslims than anyone else that I've ever met. Do those people exist?
No,
I
no,
mean, you'd
we're
have
not
to.
talking about an existence of a people. We're talking about
No, okay,
an
but we're talking
ideology
about the ideology of
discriminating
Islam as
against
practiced,
people.
right? So if you're going to say that every version, every iteration of Islam believes that gay people need to be executed, I don't. That's not my Islam. You'd be hard to find someone like that in my community who thinks that gay people need to be executed, right? But that does. I mean, that's not to say that if you go to an authoritarian area, like all over the world, that's not in the West, you'll find those kinds of people. And in my view, I think it's out of ignorance, but that's
Yes,
because of how I understand my faith and my ideology, which I call Islam. You know what I'm trying to say? And it might sound like I'm trying to split hairs, but I think the difference here is we need to be careful about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to find allies, people who you want to work with, and trying to, if you're worried about that community, how are you going to empower them if you're throwing away some of your allies? The gay Muslims who strongly believe in Islam, who pray more than I do, who
okay.
fast Ramadan. How are you going to uh, cooperate and work with those people if you don't believe that they have a right to be gay and Muslim at the same time? So one of the things that I learned when I was in my own like spiritual exploration was about like thinking of God as infinity, right? This idea uh, that I think a lot of kids learn by accident is that God is like a person with a beard somewhere. It's the singular source. Uh, but in Islam, the way that God describes himself as infinite here and there, and the past and the future, it's impossible for me to then read the words of the Quran and think to myself, there's only one way to understand this whole book, right? uh, Islam, the Quran is a book that describes itself as for all people of all time. Now, you can read the book as a child and read the book as a young adult and read the book as an old person, and you're going to have different takeaways from the same book. You have the different takeaways of watching a movie, right? Harry Potter isn't going to hit the same as when you first read it when you were a teenager. So, if you're going to think about it in that way, you give Harry Potter that much credit for being a book that has different values in different parts of your life, then I think more Muslims should look at the Quran as something way more powerful than J.R.R. Tolkien, right? So in that sense, you can read about the people of Lot and think of, okay, well, these people actually raped someone. They There was an angel that was set down. For people who don't know the story, and the angel was disguised as the most beautiful person, and then this mob
Actually,
of people
there were
came
two
to their
incidents.
door and tried to
Two
knock it down to have sex with that person, and they actually succeeded, and God was very upset about that, right? So when I read that story and I interpret it, I don't think of it as, oh, they are just for homosexuality, that's why God was upset. I think of themselves as rapists. So you know what I mean? So I think I know for a fact that a lot of Muslims will disagree with me, but that's also between them and God. So I don't have a right to step in and say you're wrong. Your version of Islam is incomplete. You need me to tell you how to worship. At the same time, they can't do that for me, and that's, I think, one of the things that is complicated about Islam. We don't have a pope. We don't have someone who's supposed to be your intermediary between you and God. It's supposed to be, everything's between you and God. And that's one of the things that makes Islam complicated to talk about when we talk about Islam as a people and as a dawah and as a community versus it as the certain texts and the hadith and everything. So if we can find a way to separate the two, the people from the book, then we can have an honest conversation about the book and the people, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
I think
no,
in
no,
the
Nick,
list of
Nick,
questions, yeah, yeah,
Nick, I'll ask a question. So in the Hanbali school of thought, as well as the Maliki, the Jafari, as well as the Hanafi and the Ismaili schools of thought, all of them contain punishments for being gay. All of them,
Mhm.
with the exception of the Ismaili, which has the whipping. There is still a punishment. There's still punishment, physical punishment. So, isn't that a common thread in all sects, schools of Islam? Isn't that a common thread?
No,
Discrimination for
because if you're going to say something like all sects, you need to account for all sects.
these are all sects that I
Um,
just listed, mainstream sects.
I don't subscribe to any of those sects, so where do I fall into?
No, doesn't it's not about you, but I'm asking you, isn't there a common thread? Do you not agree?
What do you mean by a common thread? Meaning,
Execution for the gay community, punishment for the gay community, isn't that a common
because
thread?
on average, so someone like you who wouldn't,
Nikhil, let him
like,
answer. Nikhil, let
yeah.
him
So
answer.
I don't
I'm
I
just
don't
trying to,
understand. I don't
yeah, to
understand what
make,
you're asking me to say, because
all
you're
right,
saying isn't there a common thread, and you're just listing the different schools that have, in my mind, an atrocious ruling on something that needs to be corrected. But you're asking me, is there a common thread? I don't understand what you want me to say.
So I want you to say, do you not see a common thread? That's what I'm saying. Do you not see it?
I don't agree with that interpretation of Islam.
So here's a counter question. What is Islam for you, if not these sects?
Islam is between one Muslim and God, right? Here's the thing about schools. Do these schools have any authority to tell any one Muslim how to believe God?
They do. They apparently do.
They do
These
not
are
have
the,
any
these are
authority.
the
That's an
authorities.
insane thing to say.
These are the
Listen,
authorities that have
Islam,
created the rulings. Are you not aware
these
of that? These are
authorities do
authorities.
not have any actual spiritual or religious authority.
So who does
Listen,
have the
this
spiritual
is
yeah.
authority?
So Moose, one sec.
listen, this is actually really, really important when we're talking about these schools. They, if anything, see them, they gave themselves the authority, but Muslims don't have a space for it in their spiritual afterlife. God isn't going to ask you how you respected or followed the Hanafi school. In Islam, God commands you to follow the Prophet. Now, we're not here during the time of the Prophet. So, dilemma. Who do we follow? We follow to our understanding and beliefs how the prophet lived their life, and also uh, how we need to make sense of that? How do we rationalize how that applies to our lives today? Now, some Muslims will think you need to follow it exactly to the T. Most Muslims are thinking that they don't need to follow it to the T, but they need to try to follow it to the T. You know what I mean? And other Muslims will think to themselves, well, we live in a modern world with cars and TVs and iPhones. And so we're going to choose what makes sense for us in our lives that makes us better Muslims and have more fulfilling spiritual lives. Right? So when you say something like, here are all these schools that say these terrible things, for me as a Muslim person, I don't have to consider it. I don't need to even think about them or give them any second thought, because between me and Islam, it's just me and God. And this is the thing, right? So when you look at Christianity, or at least like certain sects of Christianity, there is in their actual infrastructure for the religion, there is a pope, there is a person who interprets God for them and tells them how to worship, how to pray. And even in a lot of the Christianity sects, they don't necessarily follow to a T, but you'll find ones that think of that person as the closest thing to God on earth, right? Islam doesn't have that. In fact, Islam, when the Prophet died, he said the religion was complete. So there is nobody who can come in and say, look, this is the actual way to pray. This is what God means. That's blasphemy in my mind. For any one person to come in and say, well, I understand God, so I'm going to tell you what God means. No, that's not how Islam should work. And I think there was, in my community, a huge exodus of Muslims. A lot of Muslims turned away from Islam because they didn't understand it. Because instead of being given the tools to understand and interpret the Quran for themselves, they were being told what the Quran contains, right? And so it's easy to just follow the rules if you're told them, like, okay, I'm not going to drink alcohol, I'm not going to have a girlfriend. But if you don't necessarily know why you're not supposed to do those things, you're not going to the source and interpreting it and feeling it, you're not, in my mind, establishing that real connection with Allah, with God. And that's why I said that I didn't necessarily become Muslim until later in life, even though I went to the Muslim schools, even though I never had like a period where I called myself an ex-Muslim and it came back. No, I just didn't actually understand and make that connection for myself. And I think that's Islam. Islam is a path. It's supposed to help you guide your path, right? So if somebody's going to say that all people's paths are the same, that doesn't make any sense. So I think of those schools as archaic and dying because they're hemorrhaging supporters and people are connecting on the internet in ways that they've never done before in history. So no, I don't recognize any of their authority. I think you'd be pressed to find a young Muslim in America who recognizes any of those schools as being the final word on Islam.
So how do they come up with other rulings on how to pray and whatnot?
So say that again.
How do they come up with rulings? How does one pray then?
How does one pray? They have to take what they understand and do their best. So like when you're praying towards Mecca, you're supposed to pray exactly towards Mecca, right? Some people created an app. Some people like they have like sundials. They try to find their way. But in Islam, you could just face east if you don't know the way, and it doesn't make your prayer invalid because you're not facing exactly the direction to the nth degree, right? There's at the beginning of every single surah in the Quran, God describes himself as the most merciful, the most gracious. Every single surah, every single chapter. Now, what does that mean? For me as a Muslim who's trying to understand God and what God wants me to feel, that every single time a new chapter started, he was reminding me how merciful God is. So this is the thing. I don't associate or recognize my Islam, and people who are authoritarian, who see their version of Islam as being difficult or anything like that, where they can't pray at all unless they're facing the perfect. That's crazy. You know what I mean? So when you're asking me how do I know to pray, I take what I know and I apply it to my best ability. And I know that God is the most merciful of everything. And so I know that if I feel it in my heart, that I'm benefiting from it.
So, but
Yeah, based off of that, I wanted to ask you a quick question.
Sorry, Nikhil. The Quran doesn't have exactly a methodology outlined on how to pray. It Exactly.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
where do you get that knowledge from? Then?
Does every Muslim know exactly how to pray? Does every
Absolutely.
Muslim pray
There,
exactly the
there
same
are
way?
there are
No, that's not
instructions in
true.
the hadith. There are instructions in the
And
hadith. There are
people
instructions in the
disagree on how to pray. Listen, people disagree on how to pray exactly. There are people who pray women and men mixed together. There are people who pray men on the right side, women on the left side. There are people who pray men in the front, women in the back. People who pray with their arms crossed like this, with their arms touching their elbows. People just touching their wrists. What are you talking about? That people all pray in the exact same way? That
I never
doesn't.
said that.
That's
I
not.
never
That doesn't
said that.
reflect the
I never
reality.
said that. I actually said there are instructions on how to pray in the hadith and in the rulings. So where do you
Not in the
get your
rulings.
methodology? And there's nothing in the Quran. So where do you get that?
Again, you do it to the best of your ability from your knowledge. Listen, and this is you're sort of circling around the same thing, but if you keep this in mind, it's going to make the whole rest of this conversation easier. And this is important. If you, as a Muslim person, are looking for the answer, that is in itself Islam. The search is the Islam. If you aren't searching and you're just doing things out of out of repetition, that's not Islam. That's just you're just performing, right? Who are you performing for if you don't know why you're doing those things that you're doing? So I think I'm talking about Islam as the way that I understand it, as a spiritual religious belief, right? This belief in God. You're asking me questions about these men in different countries that I've never met, that I've never associated with. Why do I give a shit about these crazy people?
I'm
And
not talking
honestly,
about different countries. I'm talking about different ideologies and different what do you call it, sects, that is, and different fiqhs. I'm not talking about people in different countries.
you are asking me about people in different countries
No,
and
I'm not.
different
I'm
faiths.
talking about different fiqhs. That's a different topic altogether.
But you also said that as a Muslim person, the people who do these fiqhs are the intermediary between me and God,
No, I never
which
said
is
that.
a fun.
Never said that. I actually said these are what they establish the rules and how the rules are established.
They
In
don't.
these
They didn't establish the rules, man. They don't. They don't. They wish they did, but they
they
don't.
use the hadith and the Quran to establish said rules, and different
Oh my
scholars came
God.
together to. Now,
Listen. So let's
All
talk. Let's
right,
talk
so,
about
so
hadith.
here's another question I'll ask you. Why
Let's
do you
talk about
feel-
hadith. No. Let's
yo,
talk about
guys,
hadith.
guys, talking over each other. Moose, let's ask him one question and let's see. Amin said about the hadiths. Then ask him a question about the hadiths, and we'll go from there because crosstalk might not be good for our bandwidth.
Good
Okay, no,
idea.
I have a different question.
All right.
Why do you feel you follow the true Islam? What are the indicators?
Because I feel it when I pray.
That's it. What's the feeling?
Yeah, because I was looking for that feeling my whole life, and I never felt it until an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And when I felt it, I knew that I'd found Islam.
All right. Nikhil, do you have a question?
So, based off of that, this is something I wanted to ask before as well, based off of the discussion. Then, would you subscribe to something more of what, like something that more of what someone like Majid Nawaz says, where he says maybe we should go through with a fine tooth comb and some of the stuff that doesn't actually fit with modern society or modern values or what liberal values and freedoms are. Those should be kind of banned. Would you subscribe to something more like that? Something like what Majid Nawaz says? Or
Well, who would be doing that? Would Majid be doing that and deciding for all Muslims how to practice Islam? We're running in you know what I mean? That's not how
Yeah.
I understand Islam. It's not about one person interpreting for everyone how to practice, right? It's about creating a real connection between a person and their maker. And so is Islam, and I think this is like the trouble right now, that I've really started to really hate. Are people looking for the one true version that fits everyone's lives? It doesn't exist. It doesn't fucking exist, man. It's not going to exist in 10 years from now. if you were to decide with a fine comb, whatever Majid said, if you were to do that now in 100 years, that definition will change. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So we need to empower people to understand it for themselves and make their own goddamn choices. Because in the end, and this is in Islam, you're going to be held accountable for your own actions and your own beliefs. You're not going to be asked about another person's sins. You're going to be asked about your sins. And you know when you're sinning, you feel it. In the same way that you know when you're doing a good deed, you feel it. And so these are the real things that I'm interested in as a Muslim, right?
Yeah. On
These things
that
that
note, I'll just ask one small thing. Let's take something like Quran Surah 9, 73 to 73, where someone, I technically qualify as a kafir, and there was someone subscribes to that mentality where he thinks I should be burning in all the hellfire and I'm getting judged for it. That doesn't seem, it might help him spiritually, but it doesn't really do me any good, right?
why do you
So
care what God says if you don't believe in God? If you
I
don't
don't
believe in
care.
the
God,
afterlife, then like
I don't care what God would think, but I care what that guy who reads that in Quran 973 and then starts judging me based off of it, right? That
also
would be the issue there.
Islam also tells you not to judge people. Hold on, let me find that verse.
Yeah, no, it's just a question because like it's one.
There's a verse in the Quran that describes, "Oh, you who believe, let not some people among you laugh at others. Perhaps they may be better than them." There's so many verses about not judging people. So that's a
So
sin.
Quran 3363, right? I believe the verses that you're mentioning is Quran 3363.
It's mentioned a lot. The one that I was
Yeah.
right now looking at was Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 11. But it says it a lot of times in the Quran.
Yeah.
Listen. This is really, really important.
Yeah.
In Islam, dude, it's really a spiritual religion. It's meant to empower you as an individual to be better and to leave the earth better than when you left it. So if you are reading the whole of Quran and walking away thinking to yourself that, oh, I'm gonna go and like screw these are the people who don't believe, what are you reading? Right? If you read the whole of Quran, and how are you gonna walk away and think to yourself, I need to police other people? It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't. Listen, Islam has always been like a personal journey, a personal jihad. I hate using the word jihad in English because some people just love to run away with it. But for me, the true definition of jihad is trying to make yourself a better person, improve yourself so that you can be better service for other people. How is that? I mean, how is that like a bad thing? Right? And why on earth would any Muslim feel like they like judging other people is more important than improving your own faith? And again, Islam is it's not also like a point that you reach and then boom, you're Muslim and you're good. It's a thing you have to continue working on, right? And that's why the greater jihad is the greater jihad, because it's so hard to make yourself better. You know what I'm saying? So these are the things that when you talk to me about Islam, these are the things that I'm thinking about. This is how I interact with Islam. When you pull like a hadith or bring these fiqh or bring whatever, it's not my experience and like dealing with it every single day. And I know that I might be in the minority in that sense, but it's when we're talking about Islam globally. But I think that this is a lack of education problem, right? If we can empower people to read the Quran for themselves, we're going to solve a lot of those problems. And that's my belief. But then you have people who think, oh, you take Islam out of the equation and then all these problems go away.
Sorry, sir.
Bless you. How does that doesn't make any sense to me, because you find these problems everywhere where Islam doesn't exist. You know?
Yeah, you are correct. Yeah, because Islam isn't the only problematic ideology. I agree with you on that, because you have horrible elements in Christianity as well. You have horrible
Also,
elements.
I mean, I like to think of it
Yes.
as human nature. Also, in the Quran talks about God, our need for God, and that if we were just left to our own devices, we suck. We're not capable of creating peace, right? Um, And you find that in Muslim countries, because I don't necessarily think that those people are practicing Islam the way I practice it, in the way that I think is the best way to do it, right? I'm only doing what I think is best for me.
Yeah.
And I have a community of Muslims that I'm with, and we help each other be better Muslims, right? We're not going out trying to police people. I mean, we're in America. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And so I would love for more Muslims to see it that way. I know globally we have a lot of work to do, but Majid Noez coming in and saying we need to create our own school of thought isn't necessarily addressing the problem that I think exists. The problem of education, people reading it for themselves and having their own individual relationships with God, like Islam is intended to do.
Thank you so much. There's a question I
Yeah.
want to backtrack on. It's an interesting point you brought up earlier. I know it's we're all over the place because it's such a vast topic. You stated,
Yeah, I was gonna mention like we went way off the question, so we were gonna
yeah,
have to go. But yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, ask the
no,
question.
definitely. You stated that the prophet said that the religion is complete. Yet, you also state that no one knows the correct version of Islam. Isn't that a contradiction? And why do you think that is?
No, because again, you have to think of Islam as infinite, right? A religion for all people of all time. And also, there's there's Sahih Bukhari, the book of Hadith, and you have to be careful with Hadith because you don't necessarily know which one's true and which one's false. It's sort of a mixed bag, and that's why you have to be skeptical when you go into the Hadith. But if you find something you could benefit from that helps you with your Islam, you pull from it, and so that's my approach to the Hadiths.
So do you
Uh,
feel you
Hold on, let
see?
me answer the question. Let me answer. You asked me a question. So the idea that Islam is complete, uh, yeah. So basically, in that sense, we have everything we need to create Islam in ourselves and to believe in God, right, and to worship God. We do have everything that we need. Uh,
Mhm.
but at the same time, there's a hadith that says that we're not meant to understand everything in Islam, and that there are certain things in Islam that are beyond our comprehension, and there are certain things that are within our comprehension, and that not every part of Islam is for every person, right? There are parts of Islam that dictate the rules of war. I'm not a person who's a soldier fighting a war, so those don't pertain to me. There are things for men and there's things for women. Identify as a man, so that the things about women don't pertain to me. It's not going to improve my religion, my relationship with God, to obsess over how women should be practicing their religion. You catch what I'm saying? So in the purpose of Islam, it for me has always been to improve yourself so that you can improve the world and improve the society around you. Become a better Muslim means becoming a better member of society. And in that vein, uh, yeah, Islam is complete because we have everything we need to get someone to get on the path to discover Islam and also strive to improve themselves. Is the religion complete in the sense where we've caught them all, like Ash Ketchum Pokemon? I don't think that that's the correct approach to Islam in the first place. So if you're thinking about Islam as complete, meaning we understand it finalized and boom, we have the blueprint for the perfect life experience, that doesn't exist.
All
But
right, just to bring it. All right,
yes,
Moose.
keep in
We
mind.
because like
Oh, we're limited on time.
oh no, because like at the 1 hour mark, 1 hour 15 mark, I want to go into Q&A, right? So that's
Yeah, yeah,
why
yeah,
we only got 10, 15 more minutes left. I want to get back on the original track that we had.
yeah, yeah.
I
We
got a
have 11 minutes. Nick, yeah, you can ask your question.
All right. So basically, I know we jumped over a bit. You discussed your interview with Sarah, and then we talked about Islamophobia and free speech. So basically, we'll just jump to this one last question. Understand, I hope in the discussion that we had so far, you understand where we, as ex Muslims, actually do come from in terms of trying to hold liberal values. And I think you share many of them. So, in terms of a relationship between us as an ex-Muslim group and Muslims, or whether modern Muslims or postmodern or just Muslims in general, what do you think should be done to improve whatever relationship we have? Because obviously it's been quite shaky based off of my experience that I've discussed, and same with Moose.
I was at the ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America's convention, and there was a group of ex-Muslims. I remember one guy's name. His name was Arvin. I forget his last name.
Arvin Navabi?
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think he came in and he was like live casting, and he was expecting Muslims to get really pissed, and he was like kind of bracing for that. But then he on his cast was like talking about how they showed up and Muslims came out to talk to them, and it was like
Yeah.
conversation, right?
Oh
And this
yeah.
is ISNA. This is like the mainstream like convention for Muslims in America. I was there.
Yeah.
I didn't see them there, but there were like protesters with guns who were like Trump supporters who were trying to stand outside and like intimidate us. There were like some counter protesters, like in Texas, who showed up with guns to protect the Muslims, even though we were all just in a convention center. There were cops there and everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's this. I think this like the answer is kind of like just go touch grass, because like we're on the internet a lot, and we might encounter some of the worst people because the internet brings out the worst of us, right?
Yeah.
Even I'm on the internet sometimes, and somebody's like talking shit, and I feel like I should like clap back, like I feel like there's
Yeah,
something at it. But I've
yeah.
like
Yeah.
cut down my Twitter use a lot
Mm-hmm.
because it's not good for you. It's not good for me to just like be entertaining those sides of me. So yeah, with the ex-Muslims, I mean, and this is not just, it's everybody. It's Muslims, ex-Muslims, non-Muslims. Put yourself in a space where there are people who are different from you, and be yourself. If like the topic comes up, cool. If the topic doesn't, whatever. There are people in my life who are close friends who I grew up with. We all grew up with like the same version of Islam, where it was like very much like your arms have to be like this and you have to face this way, and like this is Islam and this isn't Islam. Which to me, again, like I had to learn Islam on my own, because of how little I learned about Islam back then. There are people who didn't come back to Islam, and who there are people in my family who aren't Muslim. It's like we're people. We're just people. And so if you feel like you are in a space and you have a relationship with someone who is Muslim or non-Muslim, you end up finding that a lot of these relationships are the same, and that people are just fucking people. And so when it comes to like improving the relationships, it's just get the fuck offline, man, and just talk to people. There's
Yeah.
no way in hell that you show up to a mosque in Canada or America and you talk to somebody and you say, "Hey, I left the faith because of X, Y reasons." There's no way in hell that someone's gonna like, turn into automaton or just fucking turn into a robot and try to kill you because of whatever. That doesn't
Let me
exist in my mind.
let me tell you a quick story. I did exactly
Yeah.
that. I called my local mosque to get an interview. Moose knows about the story as well. The exact quote from the imam there was, uh, "You can come and ask the questions, but I can't guarantee your safety." I
What a
haven't
dickhead.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we have it. We
You
even
should
had
publish
an
that.
interview with Mr. Dr. Abdul Patel, I believe, in this show. And he said that, oh, you can leave, but you will watch out for you have to be prepared for the reaction of the Muslim community. Those are his exact words. So
That's
this
insane.
is one of
yeah,
the
and,
authority figures. So it was
and
quite
then
like,
the thing is, I didn't even ask. I asked my secretary to call, and she's like one of those like super white like liberal arts kids that called, and like that update tone, like "Hi, it's so wonderful" kind of tone, right? And this is the exact noting that she wrote on a note to give me, and I'm like, "What the fuck did you just say?"
Yo,
mm.
this imam's got like mental problems, man. Like, how
One,
on earth? Like,
yeah,
dude, it's so like in the Quran, it also says like be kind to people because that's how you invite them to Islam, right? You don't do that by being hard and trying to like threaten people. So even if like you were following your own fucking religion, man, that's what I mean. Like the education in the world about Islam is so nihil. One of the signs of the last day, like the day of judgment, is that there are no Muslims left on earth. Now, does that mean that nobody will identify as Muslim? No, I think that tends to mean that people don't practice Islam, that they're not looking to improve themselves and they're not on this path. This guy sees himself as like an imam and he's just threatening people over the phone for no reason.
Yeah, no,
Last question, at least from my side. I had this
after that, we'll do
type-
Q&A. Yeah,
yeah,
after
yeah.
that, we'll do Q&A, and then I'll put the link in the
Yeah,
description
yeah, yeah.
for.
I really hope some audience member shows up. I came across this book. I read this book as well. Very interesting book, like Problems with Reforming Islam. Um, do you see yourself as a reformist?
No. I kind of see myself as somebody who's harkening back to like the old school version of it.
Mm-hmm. And Nick, do you have another question?
Not from me personally, but I think Dave asked a good question. Or he at least mentioned it in the chat, so I'll ask that right now as a part of Q&A. So, so he wanted to know how did humanity come into existence and how your views on the evolution are. I was supposed to upload a video on this before, but technical issues, so I think that's why.
Okay, I obviously believe in evolution. I obviously believe in the Big Bang. I don't necessarily think of those things as opposites. You can always think of things as like the how and the why, and I think of Islam as the why and science as the how. So that's my answer
Yeah.
on that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah, and just so you know, we did an interview with an actual imam. So this Dr. Abdul Patel people are talking about in the comments. I've been addicted to Adderall, and it's something I never actually want to touch again. But during that interview, I was actually contemplating taking Adderall and just go through it. So,
Why?
and just because it was so much, like, I don't know how to say it nicely. I don't want to offend the gentleman, but it was like essentially spewing nonsense in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
people tend to do that.
we'll send you the link to the video later on. But I think we can actually start the Q&A early.
Yeah.
I know we're 3 minutes, so we can actually start it.
Yeah, so
I looked
the
at the
link is-
comments for a second. I had to turn around because some of these people are kind of mean.
Oh yeah,
That's
we got
okay.
some.
We're here to protect you. Don't worry.
No,
Yeah.
I don't need
If
protection. I'm
anyone-
just gonna call them out for being dickheads. They know who they are.
All right, all right.
Oh, if anyone like talks trash, I'll
We'll
mute
mute
them.
you.
But yeah,
No. We believe in free speech. They can talk
All right,
trash.
all right. So,
Yeah.
all right. So you sent the link. You're welcome
yes.
to come in. Anybody, please come on the chat. We'll give it a minute or so. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
if Nick or you have a question. Oh,
For us,
I'll ask you a final question, just a general question for you, Mr. Ayman. It's a very general question. What are the primary texts for you regarding Islam?
That isn't the Quran.
No, including the Quran. You can state Quran or other texts, but do you feel like are there other texts or just the Quran itself?
Just the Quran, but there are 1,001 books to help you understand the Quran. But the Quran is the only book that I take as like direction on Islam. But again, there's like 1,001 books that I've also. I'm not gonna pretend like I read all of them, but I do that thing where like I buy them and I have them, and I'm like I'm gonna get to them. Some of them are contemporary. Some of them are from like the 15th and 16th centuries. Some of them are older than that. But there's this one author that I love, El-Ghazali. So his story is amazing. He's like a jurist who was like a famous jurist who wanted to pursue Islam further. He was already considered like the top Islamic authority in where he was. But he wanted to pursue Islam further, and he thought that his status would get in the way of that. So he left and basically he like slept in a mosque, and he was like the sweeper and the custodian of that mosque for the rest of his life. He like gave his family some money, and he was like, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go like see where Islam takes me. And he wrote a series of books after that. One of them is called the Revival of the Religious Sciences, and that to me is one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. By the way, sorry about the coughs. Consistent, but yeah, Al Ghazali is kind of interesting. I've even read that he belonged to the Shafi school of thought, and he was also a Sufi as well. But yeah, it's very interesting. Oh, Culture Ginny, welcome finally.
Oh, Moose, you got to say thank you to Culture Jenny. He actually took your spot for the last few weeks.
Yes,
while you
Culture
were-
Ginny has been replacing me since I was in my trip to Pakistan, and I had to stay away for a while and stay on the down low. So yeah, thank you so much, Culture Ginny, for taking the spot. I really appreciate it. I wish I could buy you flowers, but you're all the way in another continent, so I can't send you
No
flowers.
problem.
Worship.
All right, so the floor is yours, Culture Jenny.
All right, just a quick question about Islamophobia and how it is defined. I'm wondering, since there does exist Muslims, or people that say that they are Muslim and claim that actually Islam does include these rules that most people would find horrific or archaic, or insert negative description that you would probably agree with, or those things. I mean, is it really unreasonable to be afraid of people that believe those things? Because they do have a certain legitimacy for their interpretation
Yeah, no, I think that's legit.
as well. And thus, that is a part of Islam. I agree with you that Islam does also include liberal Muslims who are no threat at all, and that I don't have any issue with. But it does also contain these, traditions. I have a background in studying Middle Eastern history, specifically Arabic history. I have a master, even a master in it. So it's kind of having done things related to law and especially divine law and rulership.
Yeah. So to answer your question simply, yeah, it's not irrational to fear those people who think that they have the authority to kill people. That's obviously illegal. It's murder, and those people should be in jail if they ever even went so far as plotting murdering someone. They do not have that authority. I don't think Islam gives them that authority. So yeah, it's not irrational. Is it irrational to be afraid of all Muslims because those people exist? No, I don't think so. And you said it already, but that's sort of that's the difference. And I think that difference is necessary because if we're going to assume that we're in the room with someone who's never heard of Islam or never met a Muslim, which there was like a recent poll that found that most people in America identify that way. They feel like they've never interacted with a Muslim once before. So if you imagine one of those people being in the room, and then you start saying, well, Islam teaches this, how will they know the difference between that crazy psychopath who thinks that they have the authority to kill someone versus someone else who doesn't, who is just believes in Islam because they believe that Islam makes them a better human, a better neighbor, a better citizen. So how do those people know the difference? And so when you start getting into the language of Muslims are like this, Muslims believe this, then you're falling into, in my mind, Islamophobia territory. And that's just my opinion.
Yes, I agree with you that when you begin to generalize about all Muslims, I do know that a lot of Muslims, now it's probably due to my interactions with people from the Middle East and down there, and not so much westernized Muslims in Europe. But anyway, the thing is that I have developed kind of a technique that I usually do in order to determine just how extreme someone is. And of course, there are degrees here as well after when you get extreme and it is. But my question is usually, do you think that when it comes to, for example, blasphemy of Muhammad or saying that you are no longer a Muslim, do you think that that should be punished by law or actions in this life?
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good way to determine it.
Yeah, because if they say yes, then you will have to, begin to realize that this is more of a traditionalist Muslim, and there are degrees here as well. But
I wouldn't call them traditionalist, but I would say yeah.
I mean, there are long legal traditions about Ridda and those things.
Yeah, but there are also traditions of plurality, particularly if you look at like the Ottoman Empire, when it was in like the 12th through the 14th, 15th century, they were considered the most diverse and tolerant society on the planet.
No, yes, so, but they still. They did, yes, they were very diverse, and they actually most of their legal code was actually Roman law rather than of various thick interpretations of Sharia. But that is kind of it's still a pre-modern or pre-industrial society with they still had laws against tajdith and against Ridda apostasy.
Yeah, but you can also look at something like the Constitution of Medina, right, which was written in the time of the Prophet, and that also speaks of a pluralist society where non-Muslims and Muslims can live together. So you can really, the history is so long and muddy that you can go.
I think you misunderstand. I'm not talking about living together with non-Muslims. I'm talking about what happens when a Muslim says, or a previous Muslim says, I no longer believe in this. That is more of my view of tolerance, because in traditional Islamic view, you can still live with Christians and you can still live with Jews, but you can't allow people to convert away from the religion without punishment in this life. In the traditionalist, not everyone has fought like this, and there does actually exist some exceptions, even in medieval times.
Yeah.
Ironically, even Hanbal or Hanbal would have argued that a Muslim that says that he no longer believes and doesn't raise any action was never a true Muslim to begin with, and he is not a threat to the faith. So he did actually have some arguments that apostasy was okay.
And also in the Quran, there is a verse that says if they don't wage war against you, then you can leave them be. So
yeah, he did base it upon that.
Yeah. So unless someone leaves the faith to join an enemy army and then wage war on Islam, in that case, yeah, they're your enemy. But if they aren't waging war on you, and you, like in my case where I'm not in a state of war at all, I'm not a soldier, it just doesn't pertain to me. So that's
how I see it. I agree. I just meant that traditionally, since many of these earlier polities, I would say states, but rather political entities or polities that existed in Arabic Islamic history were based upon various interpretations of the Quran, the Sunnah, and also the consensus Ijma'i literature. It meant that just being against the religion was the same thing as being against the state, or rather the polity, which meant that there did evolve of these very practical tradition within Islam that I think distinguishes Islam from Western Christianity. There exist some versions of Christianity, especially if you an Orthodox Christianity, which is very close in how it is practical in certain regards and in similar ways to Islam. But in the end, I would say that Islam actually does have a very serious legal tradition that needs to be considered, because these laws and legal traditions actually lasted for more than 1,000 years in certain places, and that still needs to be regarded even if we don't, agree with these laws, it still needs to be considered.
Considered by who and in what way?
Considered that that there exists a long tradition behind this, and so it does have a lot of people that believe these laws to be legitimate, and that there does exist issues because of this. I'm not saying accept the law, but I'm saying accept that a lot of Muslims still view these laws as being legitimate.
Yeah, no, I do. I do, and I think of it as a problem that needs to be fixed. Yeah, I mean, I called it a problem of education because I believe that if you were to introduce these people to Islam as a singular relationship between a Muslim and God, that some of these issues will address themselves, right? If they start getting into, oh, well, this sheikh on this TV channel, which is how a lot of people learn about their religion in other parts of the world. This one person on this YouTube channel says this, then they're probably right because they have some authority and they have a beard and whatever. But if you give them those people the tools to understand Islam, in my mind, the way that it was meant to be understood, as this path that makes you a better person, as this, then you won't encounter those same kinds of problems. In my mind, in my opinion.
And here, sorry, maybe I should just leave, or I mean, Nick or Most, should I just leave? I've been here pretty.
Hey, Culture Ginny, you're welcome to ask as many questions.
All right.
Yeah, it's an open door, don't worry. We've also set
you can teach me things, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, ask away, Culture Ginny, and you basically picked up after Moose's mess for the last 4 weeks. So yeah, you get to ask as many questions as you want.
But I mean, for example, in Islam, we have, besides the Quran, we have the Hadith literature, and yes, there exist various traditions about which Hadiths are Sahih or which is true or not.
Right. The Shias reject any Hadith given by Aisha. So, yeah, it's not necessarily that every Muslim needs to agree on these things, because we don't. And that's what goes back to the point I made about us not having a pope or an intermediary. No one Muslim has the authority to tell another Muslim exactly how to worship or how to be Muslim or what to believe. And so I think when we get to talking about the ideology, we need to be really careful about not lumping in the way it's practiced. And so that's why I'm sort of answering things in my own capacity when we're talking about different schools or talking about different people outside of the culture that I've never interacted with, or I frankly don't care about. It's because it has no impact on the way I see Islam or how any of the people that I interact with on a daily basis think of Islam.
This is also why I, in the comment section, try to actually, write that people shouldn't be so hard on you, because you are not the same as, these traditionalist Muslims that I discussed.
Why do you call them traditionalists?
Because they do have a long. I'm not saying that tradition is true or that this is the true interpretation of Islam. I'm saying that they are traditionalists because they follow a long tradition of interpretation.
I would call them psycho-orthodox. Because I think of myself as someone who's going back to the tradition, right? Like thinking about Islam in the same way that the people around the Prophet thought of Islam when they encountered it for the first time. So that in my mind is, more of a, I guess, not tradition is the word, but yeah, it just that phrasing just kind of bothers me, because it feels like you're lending them maybe more legitimacy than like a contemporary Muslim, because traditional implies authority.
Yes, but there is also the fact that they claim. I mean, it's an historical fact that they have a long tradition of interpretation. Sure, you might say that they don't go back to the true understanding of how it was during the time of Muhammad, but they themselves would claim otherwise. And there does exist along, source chain, if you look at various schools and how they developed, because they didn't, just developed suddenly from nowhere and, never changed. They did actually argue within themselves and did develop a bit through the, centuries. And ignoring these traditions, I think, is kind of, sure, you might not agree with them, but they are, for me, they are just as much of a legitimate part of Islam as your interpretation of Islam is.
Fair enough.
One doesn't exclude the other. I'm
Right.
very well aware about how broad Islam is. I mean, some of my closest friends belong to various, Shia subsects, Zaydi and Ismaili Shia, respectively. And I know people from, Sunni backgrounds as well. And they have very different interpretations.
Yeah. I have different interpretations than my mom and my sister and my brother. Like it can be that close sometimes.
There's a question I wanted to ask. Do you feel sometimes, well, actually, a lot of times, do you feel that the extremist is correct or can be correct about the interpretations?
No.
And another question I wanted to ask, you say that you wanted to follow the Islam close to the Prophet's time, but based on what primary texts beside the Quran? Because the Quran does not have Muhammad's biography or anything like that.
Based on the hadith, but also piecing together the narrative and the story based on the best of my ability. So if something in the hadith, again, it seems like crazy or outlandish, I'll usually just ignore it entirely or toss it out. Right? You aren't required at all to follow the hadith as if it's fard, which is like as equal to the Quran.
Obligation.
The Quran is correct. Yeah, I was blanking on the definition. But yeah, you're not supposed to, as far as I understand it, think of the hadith as obligation. It's more of like a thing that's available that human beings compiled together in the hopes of the future generations of Muslims, that they'll have access to it and they can make of it what they want. The hadith is not like a regular text. It's not written like a story. It's literally just I heard from so and so who heard so and so say, and it's very meticulously tracked, specifically so that whoever is encountering the hadith later on can make their own judgments on whether or not these hadiths have any pertinence to them in their lives. So it's done. That's why I believe that the people who compiled the original hadiths kept that in. Otherwise, if they thought that it was just as important as the Quran, they would have just wrote it as a list and maybe even narrativized it, which they didn't do. So, in my mind, the hadith is something that is there that you can read through. If something doesn't really make sense, who cares? If something does make sense, great, use it. If something is confusing, investigate it further, see where it takes you. But then again, I find that especially when we're looking at the hadith, it tells you more about yourself. Like picking and choosing which hadith to follow ends up, in my mind, saying more about the Muslim than it does about Islam.
But wouldn't you argue, wouldn't you be doing the same thing?
Yeah, of course. We're all doing that.
Also, the hadiths were written 2 centuries after Muhammad's death, more than 2 centuries after Muhammad's death.
And the Quran was only ever written down, I think, like 70 years after the Prophet's death?
No. It's actually compiled within the Caliphate of Usman, actually, 650 to 656 AD or ACE. So Muhammad died around 630 CE. 632.
Okay, so like 50 years later.
No, 25 years later, actually.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So are you, I wanted to ask, are you aware of the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham?
No, tell it to me.
So yeah, I highly recommend this. Check out the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham. This text, even though a lot of Muslims reject it, I would still pay attention to the text because this was written around before the Hadith. That is, so this is the earliest biography. Ibn Hisham does admit that he has made changes to it, but there is a very good English translation. I think we'll even send you the link to it too. So I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I'd love to read it.
Yeah. Like it's I highly recommend that. Yeah, I was surprised you didn't know about that because a lot of Muslims I bring it up, it's like they don't know about that text because it's actually I find that more honest historically, personally, compared to the hadith because it is an earlier account based at least based from a historian's lens, for example, based on a historian. It does have harsh elements in it, but I would say let's I would still recommend it though. I would still recommend Sirah of Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham. So I'll send you the link. All right.
Yeah, I've read biographies of the Prophet that I'm sure definitely cited this. But I
Probably
would love to read the original. Yeah,
probably cited this, but this one's the earliest version, and I think this man he lists the authorities. He actually lists the people that he took this from. So Ibn Ishaq was even I think in the 8th century. That is, this is between the Abbasid and Umayyad period. So,
yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah,
thanks.
definitely.
Yeah.
Check it out.
For sure. So just before, I know Why So Religious is in the back chat. So if Culture Jenny, if you have any more questions, you can ask them. If not, I'll replace you with
I will be
Why So
leaving then.
Religious for any questions. All right.
Thank
you
you
so much, Culture
Culture.
Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Next participant. Hello, welcome. Why So Religious? How are you doing today?
I'm well, yourselves.
Oh, I
Very
know.
well,
I told you I'm
alhamdulillah.
sick earlier, so you occasionally hear me cough. That's why I'm muting myself a lot. I really apologize to you guys. But yeah,
I hope you feel better, man. Drink some water.
I'll try. I'm gonna drink some soup or something like that after the show.
All right. Why So Religious? Your questions.
So I have something that's kind of a theological wondering here. So
Awesome.
Did you ever pray to Allah and ask him if you have the correct interpretation of Islam?
Every single day, man.
Okay, but you've asked that specific question, not like Al-Fatiha, where you're like, please don't misguide me or this and that. Have you asked if I
understand what you're saying. Yeah, every single day. Like I said before, I think of Islam as a journey. It's like a path that you take. It's a commitment that you make to yourself and to God that you are going to do your best, pretty much, right? That's Islam to me, and I don't know. Nobody knows the meaning of everything in Islam. There are verses that are mystery that are meant to be a mystery, like Alif Lam Mim, the first verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. Or there's so many mysteries of the Quran that are meant to not ever be understood. So I don't think of anything as, even the way that I understand it now, as being the perfect way to understand it. I'm just doing my best.
So the point that I'm trying to get at is, if a Muslim is doing the same thing that has counter views to yours, and Allah guides whom he wants to guide you to correct Islam, and you both have different interpretations, and you're both asking for guidance, and you're coming to the different answers as what's true Islam, is Allah purposely misguiding one of you, right? And he doesn't want you to be a believer, even though you want to be a believer and follow perfect Islam.
No, misguide. So I wouldn't use the word misguide, because misguide implies that for every person is an identical version of Islam. I don't.
Well, no, wait. So there's an eternal Islam, right?
What do
the
you mean by
Quran
eternal?
defines what eternal Islam is and what the rulings are, because the Quran is. Do you believe the Quran is the internal word of Allah?
Yeah.
Okay, so then that means that Allah, an eternal concept, has already created what is Islam and the rulings for Islam.
Mm-hmm.
So If there's eternal Islam, which Allah has defined in His perfect words,
Well, no, because
the-
you're missing something though. Because the Islam as exists as a text in the Quran is lacking interpretation. Because every time anyone approaches it or reads it, again, like even in different stages of your life,
that's
like if
not
I were to read
so.
it,
I feel
hold
like
on,
you're
let me finish my
diverting.
point. Let me finish
No,
my
but
point.
you
You asked
didn't
your
let me
question.
finish mine twice.
Okay,
You
go ahead.
interjected and seemed like you were like, "Oh, well, I know what you're saying," or this and that. Let me speak. But the point that I'm getting at here, you even try to say, "Oh, Islam is different from person to person." No, Islam is eternal. Allah has determined it as
Again,
eternal.
okay, all right, finish your question.
So if Allah has made has made Islam and decided what Islam is from His eternal speech and the rulings. If two of you and a different Muslim, have disagreements about what the actual ruling or meaning is, and how you should interact with people, let's say, then that would mean Allah is either misguiding a person on purpose, because Allah guides whom He chooses, He does not guide whom He chooses, or it's not true. Because
Okay.
you have two people
Mhm.
wanting and praying for the same thing, and they are coming to different conclusions.
Mhm.
And this is about eternal soul, right? This is about deeds, and if your deeds equal this or that, then you'll be rewarded this or that way. So how do you explain that?
Okay, you're done, right? Okay, so this is how, and this is going to the definition of eternal, right? You and I don't think of the word eternal the same, and I think that's the root of your misunderstanding of how I think of Islam. Eternal in this sense means final and finished. Here are the words, right? But if you were to interpret these words in different stages of your life, you will extract different meaning of the same words. So does that mean that the meaning has to be as eternal as the text? No, I don't believe that. I think that the interpretation and the meaning of the Quran is infinite because God is infinite and the variation of human experience is infinite. So in my mind, if the Quran itself had one meaning and every verse had one meaning, and that was the same meaning that it had forever, it wouldn't be an eternal book. So in my mind,
Does
hold
worship
on,
only
no, shut.
does worship only one God have
I
one
wasn't
meaning?
done. Can you mute him?
But no, he's saying things that are like going
Hold
down a
on.
different
You
path.
I
One
listened
to
to you.
why
I
so
listened to you.
Why so? Let him finish.
let
Why so? Let him finish.
let him finish.
All right. So listen, the idea that when you approach the text as this finished and final thing, that you will only get one answer, no matter who you are, no matter where in time you are, to me is extremely limiting of this text. So I don't think of this as being. So if one person is practicing their Islam and another person in a different time in a different place is practicing their Islam, they could both be correct, but even if they look totally different. You know what I mean? So if someone is a soldier and they're fighting a war and they are themselves going through the text and they're trying to improve themselves and be a better Muslim so that they can be a better servant of God and do better good deeds, their version of Islam is not going to look the same as someone who is who works in a store, right? Whose version of Islam is being a better family man, or someone whose version of Islam who they don't have a family. So how are they all going to read the same text
So I
and
don't
believe the
think you're
same
really
thing? It
addressing
doesn't
the
really make any
concept.
sense.
So okay, like so you say, oh, so much, all of it essentially is what your argument could be taken different ways. Okay, let's do this subject by subject then, because you're making broad strokes. So is the Quran definite about only worship one God?
Yes.
What
There's
about
like I said with the hadith.
believing in his
Hold on, let
books?
me answer. You asked me
Look
a
at this
question.
guy, dude. You just went on a 3-minute diatribe. I'm trying to
Yo,
point out.
why so? Why so? 1 sec. All right.
All
What
right,
were you gonna
you
say?
being a dickhead, man. You got to calm down and let me answer the question. Otherwise, we're not going to have a civil conversation.
So
If you're
calling
going to
me a
ask me a
dickhead
question and then jump
Yo.
on it,
isn't ruder than what I did. Okay,
Yo,
gotcha.
why so? Come sec. All right. Why so? I'll keep you muted until Amin answers it. All right, go ahead.
his question was, if two Muslims are praying for the truth, why aren't their truths the exact same? And my answer to that is, a different person who is living a different life will have a different impression and a different practice of Islam. And it would be insane for me, if it's illogical for someone to believe that everyone is living the exact same uniform life, and therefore when they practice a religion, that practice will look exactly the same. And in Islam we have these very broad concepts, right? It's a religion, it's not a rule book. So when you are thinking about, there are certain truths that are very defining, like God is one, God doesn't have any kids. Okay, it's very plain. There's not many ways to interpret that. But then we have certain other things that are broader, right? Like how to treat your family, how to earn money in a way that isn't evil. Then it's like, okay, well, I live in a society now where I have to deal with interest, and interest in the Quran is characterized as this great evil, right? Like someone who works with interest is declaring war on God. It says, but I want to go to school. I want to get an education, and I can't go to school. I can't own a home without getting a mortgage or getting a student loan. So how do those things look the same when you're practicing Islam versus someone who could get an education or own a home who didn't have to take out a loan with interest? So there's this flexibility, and God talks about this mercy where you do your best and God is merciful. And that's just how I approach, and how many of the Muslims that I know approach Islam.
So the point I was trying to get at. So we'll go down a list here and see what apparently is the eternal Islam. Believing in one God. That's the eternal Islam that no Muslim could ever misinterpret, right?
Yeah. You got to believe in
his
one
final days, his messengers, angels, right?
Yep.
So those are some of them. What about
the books?
The books. So what about let's see here. What about alcohol? Does
I
Allah
think
say
it's a
that you
little
should
bit up
not
for
have
interpretation.
intoxicants? So
Yeah, I
that's
think that's
open
up
for
for
interpretation.
interpretation.
So then Allah didn't give his eternal laws definitively.
Again, you're saying definitively. I don't believe in anything in Islam
Is
being
Allah
definitively
definitive?
except for these certain things.
Is Allah definitive?
No, Allah is infinite.
But is he definitive, right? Like he exists.
No, Allah
He
is
tells you
infinite.
about himself. He tells you about what's going to happen to people who believe or people who disbelieve. These are his choices that he has defined, and they are definitive, right? There's no changing his choices, right? There's no changing what Allah believes is moral or immoral.
I
And there
think
is
anyone who says anything
you
in the
are really
Quran
ready
is
to interrupt me
definitive.
every time I speak, dude.
Yo, all right, guys, one sec. Why? So you've been here for the 15-minute mark, just like Cultured Jenny was as well. So I'll ask you to just phrase one question that you'd like to ask. I'm in here, and then we can get that one answered, and we can continue.
Here's my final question. Can you prove to me that you have the correct interpretation? Because my soul, my eternal soul, depends on it, and you go against historical knowledge and references and historical proof of practices. So can you prove to me, because my eternal soul is on the line, that on the day of judgment I will not be saying that you were one of the reformers? Thank you.
My answer is no, and I'm not responsible for your eternal soul. So I can't prove to you that my version of Islam is the perfect and only version, because I don't believe that. Thanks for your questions. I'm sorry I called you a dickhead. I lost my temper.
No, you're not, dude. Don't lie about that shit.
All right, why so religious?
Lying,
Gone.
I'm not lying. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Was there another individual in the queue?
So that's it for Q&As. It was just getting a bit heated, and then finally, right when I kicked Viso, I think it was on the verge of like breaking out into an argument. That's why I tried to put a lid on it. But yeah, so in the last part, I think if there aren't any more questions for our guests, I think it's good to turn, like we mentioned in the email as well, good to turn it around and see if they have any questions for us. So, Mr. Ismail, do you have any questions for us that you want to ask?
Yeah. When was the moment for you where you identified as an ex-Muslim?
Oh, for myself?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because Nikhil's not an ex-Muslim. He's a Hindu actually, like an agnostic.
Ex-Hindu. So, mom is from the Muslim
Yeah.
side, and my dad is from the Hindu side. And I actually took in the Hare Krishna movement because it really matched with my martial arts training. But then had to get rid of that as well. But yeah, mine's really really mishmashed. This like origin story. But yeah, basically because Moose probably has a bit more prepared statement, he should take it as the first arbitrator.
Well, to be fair, it's been 4 years since I've been an ex-Muslim. The moment there's not exact moments, but then there's exact like I know the start of the doubts, and I know the final like blow. That is the final blow that broke this. I don't remember that phrase. The straw, the back, something with the straw. Broke the horse's back, the camel's back, something like that. So my first doubt, I was actually studying the Bible actually, and I was studying the Quran, the Bible, because I also wanted to get into preaching as well. So I'm a former Jafari Shia. That is, I used to be a Jafari Shia. So my first doubt came when I found out that Satan or Satan was made up by monotheists. Again, I can go into details, but Satan or Satan was made up by monotheists because they could not they could not fathom the fact that the God, the one God, is responsible, the author of both good and evil. So they had to create this character. So that was where I was like, this is an interesting, twist in the tale. The defining the last moment, which broke it, was how Islam, all sects, and Quran chapter 65 verse 4, as well as the Shia schools as well as the Sunni schools agreed that children, little girls, should be were like there's no minimum age of marriage, but there's a minimum age of there's the sexual penetration, that is that you don't even have to hit puberty to be exploited like that. So that was what broke. It's like nope, I'm done with this because I can't stand child abuse like this. So that was where I was like, no. And especially I also like of course there's hadith of like how Muhammad screwed Aisha when she was 9 years old and she hadn't hit puberty and she was still playing with dolls. And people are going to say, oh, she was an adult. But I looked into it and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of bullshit answers to that. Because A, you're not allowed to play with dolls because that's idol worship if you're an adult. Second, she hadn't even hit puberty. And there's Fatih al-Bahri that clarifies that actually. And there's multiple hadiths that state that, from Tirmidhi to Sahih Muslim to even Sahih Bukhari as well. So that was what broke the camel's back or the horse's back. The final disbelief in a god came from the fact, again, this is a general disbelief in a god. Again, I was ex-Muslim all this time, but then I still entertained the idea of a god. That is. The final nail in the coffin was also when I discovered that El or Elohim and Yahweh and Allah were part of a pantheon, a Middle Eastern pantheon. So these were pagan gods. So these gods, no wonder why they were so obsessed with Jerusalem, because that was where these gods were born in the ancient Near East. So I did so this is where, and I'm still doing research because it is fascinating, but yeah, this is the origin of these gods and these mythologies. And that's why the prophets always came into those areas, because this is where that religion was born. So it's a local religion and it's a local God. It's not a universal God. So, and it turns out he's a myth. So that's why I, completely disbelieve.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
and for me, it was a bit more of a personal kind of thing where until I was probably 14, I don't know how much you know about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but they were
Not much.
yeah, so it's basically I'm actually a second degree black belt with Reishi Jiu Jitsu. And one of the practices that you do in there is partake upon the main Mary Jane before you do rolling. So it's an open concept. If especially if you go down to Rio de Janeiro, they'll actually take certain strains of marijuana before you roll with the other person to encourage the peaceful side. And I slowly morphed into the Hare Krishna movement, which preached the veganism and the peacefulness at the same time. And it all fell south. A lot of the questions on the metaphysical side, there was a lot of debates on whether Krishna existed, and then comparing him as a prophet, getting into that kind of arguments. I don't know if you heard about the burning of the train in Gujarat.
Yeah.
This happened a few years ago, and that was actually what broke it for me. I'm like, all right, I'm done with all this. And that's when I personally left. I'd still say I'm an agnostic. There's probably something out there, someone out there that we don't. There's an aspect of physics we don't quite know yet that still needs to be researched. I think there's a book written by, essentially, to go into a bit further, Sir Richard Penrose, I believe, wrote a book basically saying if you were to put mice into a maze where they have to turn at every third place or every second place, they would win. But the moment it hits a prime number, past 5, they wouldn't be able to turn. Just because their brains aren't able to comprehend prime numbers. So because we're able to conceptualize math a bit better than what essentially a rat is, we're able to go a bit further in the maze of life. But our brains there's still a biological limit on what we can comprehend in terms of what the physics actually is. And our math and mental status is limited. So I think there is something beyond that. But after all my research and what the kind of non-violence kind of aspect that I want in a deity or want in a religion, I couldn't find that in what I saw in the media of the Abrahamic faiths or the Hindutva movements. So I don't want to associate with them anymore.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those stories, man. I really appreciate it.
Do you have any other questions? Any other questions, Darius?
How do you think this conversation went?
I think it went. At least we're on time, so we're doing good on time. That's what I'm more worried about. But sometimes these conversations go 2+3 hours, which I don't mind. Yeah, it's so far we've been able to keep this civil. So I'm glad we asked some difficult but good questions. And Nika, what do you think?
I think we were able to ask the tough questions but keep it cordial, even though it could have been not cordial at sometimes. But yeah, I personally just enjoy discussions like this. But yeah, thankfully we're in time. I remember there was an episode like this early on. It went for like 4 or 5 hours.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a
yeah, I don't got that kind of time.
Yeah. But the thing is, the topic was so interesting. This person was telling their story, right? So we couldn't, because when the topic is interesting, that time is worth it at times. So we didn't mind, but at the same time, yeah, we do want to keep some time because it's a lot of people, a lot of viewers don't have that attention span.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There was actually one point as well where it did get uncivil on the show where I believe the hosts that were running it then had to take a 3-month break because there was a guy who came on and we were asking, I think it was like worst 424, right? Beat them like your right hand possessions. And he's like, so if let's say someone else came to Medina and conquered Medina and someone said that about, let's say, Prophet Muhammad, would you like it? He's like, no, because Islam is the one true religion. So if Islam does it, it's correct. But if someone else does it, it's wrong. And once he made that claim, where the host was like, "Are you fucking stupid?" and they had to take a
Yeah.
break for like a couple of months. And I'm like, thank God nothing like that happened today.
See, man, that's why it bothers me so much that there is so much emphasis on like learning the faith as someone else understands it versus learning how to understand it. Because you end up with people like that who have these beliefs that they believe is true, but they didn't rationalize. It didn't sink. It's not there. It's not their thought, so it's not a real thought. You know what I mean? So it's fucking sad.
Yeah.
But I have these conversations regularly with people that I love, Muslims, non-Muslims alike. It's like part of our ritual here in our community. So I don't know if it makes you feel any better, but there's some place somewhere in the world where it doesn't matter how strong or if you have a relationship with Islam at all. People get together to just discuss God, and
Yeah.
it sucks that it doesn't happen more often. I really wish it does.
Yeah, and just wanted to ask. I know in a place like Slate, not bad talking the company overall, but in like a
Oh, you better
media,
not bad talk Slate, man.
yeah, but in a media sense, where they have to like cut down essentially what you would have as like a 2 or 3 hour conversation into like an 11-minute video. How would you say your perception of a lot of the videos are in an in-person dialogue would be to what we would see in front?
My videos?
Yeah, the ones that you particularly did. I know you did one with Sarah, and then you also did another one with a gentleman from, I believe, Toronto, who was a former extremist who then
Yeah,
works
yeah,
with
Mubin
the
Sheikh. Yep.
yeah.
hmm
So
Um,
those ones are interesting, but we only see a certain front of it, like at 10 minutes. In what we had like an hour, 2 hour conversation, right? So I'm guessing
yeah,
that you probably had like a lot longer conversation with him. What sort of things do you learn from these kind
that's
of
the
things?
real work. I mean,
Yeah,
it's really easy to gather information, but your work as a journalist comes down to putting it together in a narrative that makes sense to someone who's just tuning in, right? That's your job. So as a news gatherer, it's really easy to have these long conversations, but when I'm crafting questions, I go in with the intention of understanding like what's the real crux of why we're talking. How do they fit into the larger story? So in that vein, you don't always go in, knowing what you're going to get, but then that surprise, that real surprise, ends up being what you want to keep. So then you cut everything else out, and then you end up with like a really good piece. The process is it's like baking a cake, right? You gotta put what you have in like a pot together, and then you watch it over and over and over and over, and the more that things come out as obvious, that's what you know to trim away until eventually you have something that's like, you know, 15 minutes. I didn't necessarily have to follow a lot of those rules because we didn't have like a corporate sponsor or anything. I got really lucky. I wasn't even when I first pitched doing that show, I was told no over and over again until the person who kept on saying no moved on and got a job somewhere else, and then I was able to just go crazy because I didn't have a boss anymore. But then, yeah. So if you watch it, there's no ads. Like I think they might have thrown ads now on YouTube, but if you watch it on like Facebook or wherever else, there was no ads. It was just me making videos that I thought at least conveyed the pursuit of the truth. We didn't always get to land in a spot where it felt like we found out the truth. But at least that pursuit I thought was worth publishing.
yeah, for sure. Because like that's one thing that I know in terms of like, so I work in cinema as well.
Oh,
Originally
sick.
from the tech side, but I don't know if you know Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, of course I know Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, his last film, I was actually an associate producer, and he actually,
Wow, that's
yeah,
amazing.
he passed away right
Yeah.
like a week after we were done finishing, and I had to like he had to work on like dubbing and like we had to do editing and such. He
Mm,
passed on. So like that kind of experience, I know that what we see on the screen and what goes behind the scenes is a huge difference coming from my
yeah.
personal side, right?
And I did that show by myself, man. Wrote it. I did all the questions. I did all the interviews. I shot half of it. I would usually hire one other shooter, but there were two cameras, I did all the lighting, I did all the sound, I did all the editing, did all the graphics.
Yeah,
I
that's
did
amazing.
all of the fine tuning. That show was just a part of my life that I drove myself crazy trying to perfect something. And yeah, I'm glad I did it. I would never do it again because it was just so exhausting. But yeah, I'm glad that it reached you guys. I'm really glad that you reached out to me.
No problem.
And
Yeah.
that to me, the fact that I made it so long ago and people are still like saying, "Hey, you want to talk about it?" I'm like, that's priceless. So thank you
Yeah.
for making me feel like I didn't waste my time making that project. Thank you for checking it out.
Yeah.
And thank you for having these conversations, man.
For sure.
Oh,
One other thing, I'm actually a student right now in university, so I get a lot of the student technology like Adobe for free, and then the cameras and such. So if there's ever a
Mhm.
piece where you need to like work in Toronto or do an interview, I can get you some cameras and do some shooting on the site as well.
Sick.
Yeah, because I know it like
It'll
costs 400.
probably yeah. I haven't done video in a long time, man. I'm
Yeah.
like focusing on writing. I had some success early on with some of the pieces that I wrote, and so I'm really just trying to focus on that right now. Because writing has always been the hardest part for me. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to hone that down and really nail being a writer. So alhamdulillah, man. God bless me with a lot of opportunities that I know that a lot of people don't have. So I'm just trying to make it count, trying to make some pieces that I think are working, you know?
Mm.
I hope I'm not making anybody cringe by saying alhamdulillah, but I'm
No
saying it
worries.
because I believe in it.
No
No.
worries.
It's a free speech platform, and also I'll ask you two general questions, more on the broader scale of things, just to finish it off.
Okay, but I have a hard out at 6 because that's my baby's bedtime.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So we got
What
10
do you-
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. One last question then. One last. How do you see the future of the Muslim community in general? If you can answer that.
It's scary, man.
Yeah.
It's not bright. I don't think it's been bright for a long time.
Mhm.
Like I said, I went to a Muslim school.
Yeah.
I thought I was Muslim for a long time until I found Islam.
Mm.
So yeah, I could do what I can with like my children. I'm gonna send them to a Muslim school too, but I'm not going to do what so many parents do, which is just drop them off, go to work, and then expect the school to teach them the religion.
Yeah.
You know, it's for me, I really believe it. I really believe that it's a pursuit. It's a quest for knowledge. And so when you're a Muslim, you are committing yourself to looking, not necessarily to finding.
Yeah.
So and that's what I believe, man. I really do. So
Mm.
I want to just make sure I give my kid the tools that they can go on their own quest. And
Yeah.
it'll look how it looks, but they're going to be looking. And if they're looking, that to me is how you practice. So yeah, man, it's hard because you meet a lot of people and they have no desire to look. They think they know what they know is the truth, and there is no more truth beyond what they know, and it's a disaster. And I'm not just talking about Muslims; I'm talking about just people. There's
Yeah.
an arrogance in the air, and it makes me sick. So yeah, I'm not excited,
Yeah. And
to be honest.
if yeah, I think we got 7 minutes. Yeah. Have you one last question then? If because you answered pretty succinctly. Um, have you received any like pushback from the Muslim community for the work you've done? Have you received or for your beliefs, that is, or even from the general community? What would your comments be?
No, not for the beliefs, but
Mhm.
for the focus.
Right.
I think a lot of Muslims that have reached out to me have been very gracious and like, I had one young kid who was like a college student reach out to me and be like, I never thought of Islam the way that
Mhm.
you did, and it makes perfect sense. And he was like thanking me for that, and I was like, that's dope. Like that's really dope. But I'm not like an authority. I keep telling people like, don't listen to me. I'm just explaining how I see it. I'm not a sheikh. I'm not like I'm Nikhil. When we talked, I was like, you guys can pose these questions, but all I can give you is my opinion, my thoughts.
Yeah.
And I told the same thing to the kid. I was like, look, you have to want to know the truth badly enough to spend time looking for it. And when you find something and you feel it, Like you should keep wanting to feel those feelings. And you know what I mean? So like with the last person that was like that I called the dickhead, I'm sorry. I really didn't. I shouldn't have said that. But you kept on asking about what is the finite, like Islam. How is it possible two people can practice Islam and it could be different? That to me is the beauty of Islam. Like that's why it's such a valuable like part of my life. You know that it's different for everybody, and it's just meant to help you live your life. And I'm really grateful that I've come to find it to see it that way. And I'm grateful that I speak enough Arabic and read enough Arabic to be able to go in and have like an old dictionary that can show me what some of the meanings are, like old versions. My kid's
All right.
knocking on the door.
Yeah, so I think it's bedtime, right? My little guy's going to
yes.
wake up in a few minutes too.
But
So
that's
I think it's
yeah,
best to
yeah.
start
Okay.
closing off right now. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as we did.
And thank you once again, Aymann Ismail. I know we asked some tough questions, but at least we had a fun discussion. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.
Good luck. All right.
Thank
Peace.
you.
All right. See you guys.